For years, she evaded consequences for her inappropriate behavior until she struck a formally attired black man in court, unaware that he was the judge. The immediate aftermath shattered everything she had established. It unfolded rapidly, unexpectedly. Neither the bailiff, the court reporter, nor even the defendant seated anxiously in the front row anticipated it. Officer Tiffany Rourke had just entered courtroom 2B within the Franklin County Courthouse in Missouri. Her uniform was impeccable, her jaw set, as was her habit. She had established a reputation over the last 10 years, known for being authoritative, direct, and someone to avoid provoking. That morning, she was scheduled to testify in a minor drug possession case. However, she did not reach the witness stand. She noticed a sharply dressed black man standing close to the witness box, speaking softly with one of the attorneys. Without hesitation, she swiftly crossed the courtroom floor and slapped him across the face. The impact resonated through the room. A gasp followed, shared and instantaneous. You could hear the sound of papers falling, a pen rolling onto the floor. For a moment, everything seemed to still. Everyone remained motionless. The man showed no reaction. He didn't flinch, yell, lunge, or raise a hand. He calmly adjusted his tie, brushed his cheek with the back of his hand, and looked her directly in the eye. "I'm Judge Antoine Kelly," he stated, his voice even and deliberate, "and I'm presiding over this courtroom today." That silence? It wasn't just shock anymore. It was palpable, a heavy presence. Every pair of eyes focused on Tiffany, who now appeared as if she'd swallowed a bucket of nails. She blinked once, twice, her mouth barely moving as if struggling to speak. The bailiff, hesitant about the situation, moved restlessly near the door. The young public defender close by immediately reached for her phone, documenting the scene discreetly. Others followed suit. Within seconds, at least 4 phones were recording the event. Tiffany attempted to speak. "I thought he wasn't supposed to be," but the moment had passed. Judge Kelly addressed the silent courtroom and announced, "We're taking a 10-minute recess." Then, he entered his chambers, silent, his expression unreadable. The room remained still. No one knew whether to stand, sit, or depart. Tiffany remained motionless. Her hand, the one she'd used, trembled subtly at her side. The prosecutor approached her and whispered, "You just assaulted a judge." Tiffany gazed at him, visibly pale and blinking quickly, as if the foundation had been removed from beneath her. The news spread rapidly. News reporters, awaiting a separate gang indictment case, quickly entered the hallway. Interns, having left the room visibly shaken, alerted 2 local news outlets. By noon, the video appeared on social media. It was unedited, uncontextualized footage depicting a white police officer in uniform striking a black judge in the courtroom. The accompanying caption on many reposts read, "Cop slaps a judge, unaware he is a judge." Initially, several commenters questioned its authenticity, suggesting it might be staged. The video lacked polish. It mirrored the unpredictable nature of everyday existence. There was no background music, no dramatic camera work, only palpable tension and genuine emotions. Subsequently, responses emerged from lawyers, activists, and former defendants, each possessing unique perspectives. Some immediately identified Tiffany, while others knew her through her reputation. Judge Kelly, however, remained silent. He released no public statement, avoided television appearances, and refrained from pursuing legal action. He remained seated behind his desk, reviewing the day's schedule as if nothing had occurred. However, everyone else recognized a significant change, the kind of change that leaves a lasting impact. Yet, before anyone could fully understand the implications, questions began to surface. What was the truth about Officer Tiffany Rourke? Prior to the incident, most individuals outside of Franklin County were unfamiliar with the name Tiffany Rourke. Within the force, however, she wasn't merely recognized, she was feared. Tiffany's ascent was rapid. Some believe it was too rapid. After graduating from the academy in her early 20s, she progressed to patrol, then narcotics, and subsequently to a specialized task force concentrating on high-risk neighborhoods. She received medals, appeared in department newsletters, and presented at 2 police conferences. However, beyond the publicized events and formal greetings, there existed another facet of Tiffany, the one largely unknown to the public. The initial signs were subtle. A young black driver, ticketed for a broken taillight, asserted he had not violated any laws. When he attempted to explain his situation, Tiffany increased the fine, citing noncompliance. He subsequently submitted a formal complaint, which was not addressed. A Latina mother reported that Tiffany conducted a vehicle search without justification outside a grocery store. When her 10-year-old daughter inquired about the reason, Tiffany responded, "You people should know better." The mother became distressed and filed a report, which was closed within a week. Subsequently, an event occurred that nearly reached the media. A video surfaced showing Tiffany verbally abusing 2 black teenagers seated outside a convenience store. She accused them of loitering. One of the teenagers recorded her outburst. However, the clip disappeared after the boys were arrested for resisting. There were also rumors circulating within the department's locker rooms and among court clerks. Tiffany reportedly used derogatory language when she believed she wasn't being observed. She allegedly threatened junior officers who did not support her in their official reports. Whenever her name surfaced in a formal grievance, the Internal Affairs Division discreetly marked the file as not sustained. She benefited from influential connections, including Chief Brannon, who described her as a capable officer navigating difficult circumstances. He believed the public lacked comprehension regarding the demands of policing in those communities. Fellow officers, such as Officer Sam Delaney, recognized the pattern early on. He once attempted to voice his concerns after witnessing Tiffany forcefully push a suspect's head against a cruiser window. She informed me that if I submitted any documents, my locker would be emptied by Monday. Consequently, he withdrew. They all did, not because they shared her perspective, but because Tiffany embodied the established order. She wasn't a deviation from it, nor an unusual case. She was the system. She represented the convergence of power and prejudice disguised by authority. And it wasn't simply her behavior, it was the confidence stemming from her perceived immunity. Around 6 months prior to the courtroom incident, a newly appointed officer, Jordan McLean, submitted a formal complaint following 2 weeks of riding alongside her. During that time, she halted 6 vehicles in a single day. All the drivers were black, and they were all within the same 3-block area. He documented in the internal log that none of the stops were warranted. McLean was then reassigned to desk duty 2 weeks later. Tiffany received a commendation. The underlying issue wasn't solely Tiffany's actions. It was the fact that others allowed her behavior to continue. Her advancement within the department wasn't in spite of her conduct, it stemmed from it. However, vulnerabilities had been appearing for some time prior to the incident involving Judge Kelly. Previously dismissed grievances began to reappear discreetly. The Internal Affairs Division had undergone a change in leadership, and recently elected city council members showed less willingness to ignore problematic issues. Yet, Tiffany remained unchanged. In fact, her actions intensified. At a precinct barbecue, she dismissed the evolving situation as political maneuvering, declaring to her colleagues, "They can't touch me. I possess more damaging information about a significant portion of this department than they have about me." She was unaware of this fact. However, that wasn't a display of influence. It was a countdown, and it had already begun. But when she delivered that false accusation in court, targeting the incorrect individual in the most detrimental location, that countdown reached 0. Consequently, the entire system she had depended on started to falter. When Judge Antoine Kelly returned to his chambers, he didn't forcefully close the door. He didn't discard any objects. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took a seat. He inhaled, moved closer, and grasped the pile of case files on his desk as if it were a routine Tuesday. However, it was anything but. This was unprecedented for the numerous individuals present in that courtroom. It was unusual for the lawyers who had witnessed considerable stress. But it was especially shocking for everyone involved. Nobody had ever seen a uniformed officer strike a sitting judge. Kelly had served as a judge for 12 years, primarily in Franklin County. He preferred a modest demeanor. He avoided publicity. He favored simple ties. He kept photos of his wife and 3 sons on his bookshelf, alongside a miniature gavel his youngest made in woodshop. Those who knew him understood one thing. His quiet presence carried weight. He had grown up in St. Peters, Missouri. He was the first in his family to go to college, then law school. He worked in public defense for 7 years before switching sides. He'd seen every kind of case, the petty, the tragic, the senseless. He treated them all with the same steady focus. The scene in that courtroom was jarring. That slap? It was a familiar feeling for him. Disrespect had been a constant companion throughout his career. However, this was unlike anything he's experienced. Not a subtle insult, but a physical act performed publicly and undeniably. Remarkably, he didn't react with anger or boasting. Kelly avoided theatrics. He prioritized accountability. In the hallway, his clerk, Monique Barnes, remained motionless, still clutching the folder she was intending to present prior to the incident. She entered his office cautiously. "Are you all right?" she inquired. He looked up, appearing composed. "I'm fine." She took a seat, her gaze carefully observing his face for any indication of anger. "I don't know what she thought she was doing," Monique stated. "We can file something. Press charges. The footage is already widespread." He nodded. "We could, but I want to observe how they manage it." She inclined her head. "You mean the department?" he asked, folding his hands. "The entire system." He continued. "Let's see if it's still averse to accountability." Monique noticed his approach. She understood his method. He wouldn't be aggressive. He would wait and allow them to reveal their intentions. By lunchtime, Judge Kelly's name was widely discussed online. People recalled him from a graduation speech delivered at a local high school 2 years prior. Video segments reappeared. Notable statements were shared. The law isn't a weapon. It's a tool, and it belongs to everyone, not just the loudest voices. However, he remained silent. He did not post on social media or issue a formal declaration. Responding to inquiries from reporters at the close of the day regarding potential charges, he offered this statement. "I anticipate the same level of professionalism and accountability that I have demonstrated to others over the past 12 years. I am confident that the system will address this appropriately." The situation presented a challenge, concealed by a demeanor of composure, and this was perceived by those around him. Concurrently, within the department, the atmosphere was becoming strained. The chief's assistant had left 3 messages on Tiffany's voicemail. A discreet inquiry was sent to HR by legal counsel representing the county. Simultaneously, at least 2 junior officers had reported being ill, seemingly to avoid involvement in the escalating situation. However, Kelly refrained from pressing the matter, as it was unnecessary. The recorded footage conveyed a more compelling narrative. Later that evening, at their residence, his wife, Nadine, sat beside him on the couch, holding his hand. "You should have permitted them to remove her in handcuffs," she stated softly. "I desired to do so." He confessed, "But I did not." She sighed, recognizing it wouldn't resolve the situation. "You think this time will be different?" He glanced at their joined hands. "I believe this time she chose the wrong man in the wrong place at the precise right moment." But if Tiffany thought the silence indicated defeat, she was about to discover just how resounding dignity could become when the nation was finally observing. By the following morning, Tiffany Rourke was placed on administrative leave. The official email from the department provided little detail. An investigation is underway concerning an incident involving court personnel. However, the details did not require a formal announcement. They were widely disseminated. The event rapidly spread online, with news broadcasts repeatedly showing it. Podcasts offered detailed analyses, and online forums were filled with accounts from individuals claiming prior negative experiences with her. A video surfaced from 4 years prior, depicting Tiffany arguing with a teenage boy during a traffic stop. The footage, grainy and captured by dashcam, showed her words slurred slightly, and her tone menacing. The boy had been released without charges. However, the recording remained unseen until now. This time, people weren't just speaking, they were paying attention, and her badge offered no protection. Within the department, disarray reigned. Officers murmured in hallways. Her closest allies, those who previously joked with her at Friday briefings, now abruptly had other commitments when she approached. A memo from Internal Affairs began circulating. We are seeking interviews with individuals who work directly under or alongside Officer Rourke. More than a dozen officers responded within 24 hours. Some did not provide their names. One of these officers, Detective Naomi Brennan, stated that she had waited almost 6 years to share her information. According to Naomi, she had previously threatened to reassign me to the county jail rotation if I questioned her reports again. A patrol officer, previously a cadet, recounted an instance where Tiffany placed a flashlight beneath a suspect's seat to create a pretext for a search. She referred to this as insurance, claiming no one would review her recorded footage. The situation had escalated beyond the initial incident. What began as a single event became a catalyst. Subsequently, a series of previously concealed issues were exposed. The Internal Affairs Department initiated a review of her prior reports, conducting comparisons. Analysis revealed certain trends, an imbalance in stops, and uncertain reasons given for those stops. The complaints persisted. Meanwhile, Tiffany attempted to shape the story. She contacted a local conservative talk show host, providing a hesitant phone interview, alleging the judge had appeared threatening and made a sudden action. The interview failed to gain traction. Even her consistent supporters hesitated. The sound of public relations defenses weakening became palpable when the host abruptly ended the segment, stating they would await further information before drawing conclusions. Subsequently, an email arrived from her union lawyer. A conflict of interest prevents me from continuing to represent you in this situation. Essentially, you're facing significant public scrutiny. Her inbox was flooded with messages. Journalists contacted her. Friends ceased responding. Even her daughter, 19-year-old Avery, a college freshman, sent a brief text. "Why would you do that, Mom?" Tiffany was seated in her kitchen. The once esteemed medals from her service were positioned above the refrigerator. They appeared altered now, more burdensome, as though they no longer belonged to her. She continued to feel she hadn't erred significantly. Not truly. He appeared like a perpetrator, she murmured, by herself at her kitchen table. He shouldn't have been present there, attired as he was, speaking as if he controlled the situation. Yet, she was aware. This wasn't about what Judge Kelly wore or his location. It was about her instinct, the one she never scrutinized, the one that had secured her advancements, esteem, and apprehension, but never responsibility. And now, that instinct had transformed into a destructive force. 2 days following the incident, the Franklin County Police Department conducted a press conference. Marking the first time in 15 years, the chief was accompanied by legal counsel. "We do not endorse Officer Rourke's behavior in the courtroom. An internal investigation is underway. We are treating this matter with utmost seriousness." He offered no praise, such as describing her as a good cop or noting distinguished service. He provided no words of support, just facts, objective and detached. Tiffany observed the press conference on her living room television, mirroring the actions of everyone else. However, if she believed the lack of communication from her colleagues was the most challenging aspect, she was soon to discover the consequences of the foundation she relied upon gradually disintegrating, piece by piece. Tiffany previously moved through the department with an air of ownership. That was no longer the case. Those few who still met her gaze did so fleetingly and anxiously, as if they wished to avoid association with her. The precinct felt different now. Her firm authority had vanished, leaving an unsettling emptiness. It was as if a flawed painting had been removed, yet the fastener remained embedded in the wall. The period of administrative leave stretched on, devoid of salary, identification, and explanation, only a prolonged wait. At her residence, her sphere of influence diminished rapidly. Her daughter, Avery, had ceased responding to messages, not since the night of the incident. They had not shared a particularly close bond. Tiffany had guided her upbringing with structure rather than affection. Now, The silence felt different. She attempted to call again. "This is your mom. Please, just talk to me." The line disconnected after the initial ring. Tiffany looked at her phone for a significant time before setting it face down. She had believed for so long that she was in charge, that people's fear indicated respect, that those internal criticisms were merely background noise from individuals who didn't comprehend the demands of the position. Now, she sat at her kitchen table, the blinds partially drawn to obscure the camera van parked across the street. Her time was abundant, and the silence was profound. She had not yet been charged. However, the department was no longer offering her protection. The union had ceased communication. The lawyers had stopped responding. Simultaneously, further allegations surfaced. A civil rights watchdog group submitted a petition demanding an independent review of each case she had handled during the previous 5 years. Individuals began to come forward, one after another. Individuals previously considered suspects, former officers, even a retired judge who remembered Tiffany yelling at a defendant during a trial. He had dismissed it then as stress. She checked online to read the comments, simply out of curiosity. Rourke exemplifies the need for reform. This woman believed she was above the law. She antagonized the wrong judge. Fortunately, and then the most damaging remarks from people who asserted they were her friends. I consistently felt uneasy about her. Her behavior was consistently overly assertive. I recall an instance where she laughed following a child's tears in an interrogation room. That moment remains vivid. It wasn't disloyalty, it felt like obliteration, as if she had no connection to them whatsoever. Her voicemail was overflowing with messages. Reporters, civil attorneys, and even a woman from a documentary company inquiring whether Tiffany would consider sharing her perspective. She did not respond to the call. The garage offered her a semblance of security. She would sit in the car, engine off, doors locked. She would spend hours inside, mechanically performing tasks, revisiting past cases in her thoughts, repeatedly telling herself that none of this would have occurred if that judge had recused himself, if he hadn't been attempting to create a disruption. However, regardless of how many ways she analyzed the situation, she couldn't alter the fact that she had slapped a man in open court, a man who presented no danger, who was not a suspect, who held the position of a sitting judge, and the entire country witnessed it. During one afternoon, her neighbor, Mrs. Beasley, who previously waved at her during morning jogs, passed by with her dog and did not even acknowledge Tiffany. That small instance affected her more than anticipated. The subtle dismissal, the courteous rejection, it felt more impactful than the news reports. Because news reports disappear, but being overlooked, that remains. She magnified her image. Sunglasses, a smirk, her hand rested on her hip. At the time, she believed she projected power. Now, she perceived only arrogance. However, just as she felt her decline had reached its lowest point, a letter arrived. It requested her presence at a public hearing, an event that would expose everything and compel her to confront the one man who never increased his volume, but had already undermined her legacy. A public hearing was planned for a Thursday morning at 9:30 a.m. inside the Franklin County Municipal Assembly Hall. The venue itself indicated that this would not be a routine, closed-door assessment. It was intended to be observed. When Tiffany arrived, dressed in a simple black suit, without any identification or weapons, the room was already mostly filled. Journalists occupied the rear wall, their audio equipment attached to their belts. The folding chairs creaked as residents, activists, and legal observers filled them. Behind a line of junior prosecutors, in the second row, sat Judge Antoine Kelly. He wore a dark gray suit instead of a robe, with a legal pad resting on his knee. His eyes were calm, and he appeared to be someone who had come to work, present to observe, not to punish. Tiffany's lawyer, recently appointed and a young public defender who had accepted her case with some hesitation, stood next to her, offering instructions she barely registered. Facing them, the Civilian Review Board was arranged in a semicircle of plastic nameplates and serious faces. Present were a retired detective, a former public defender, a local pastor, a community organizer, and a judge from another county. Although it wasn't a courtroom, it felt much like one. Chairwoman Ms. Loretta Vaughn initiated the session precisely. Her voice possessed a sharp clarity that commanded attention. This hearing is not a trial. It is a public review of Officer Tiffany Rourke's conduct, encompassing both recent events and her past record, and assessing its relevance to her continued ability to serve in law enforcement. Tiffany Rourke visibly reacted to the phrase, "continue serving," as if suggesting that possibility remained. It felt, to her, as though this wasn't the conclusion of her career. The proceedings commenced with the courtroom video, displayed on a modest monitor that inadequately conveyed the gravity of the situation, yet allowed for no dispute. The audio reverberated softly within the hall. The sound of the strike, the ensuing quiet, Judge Kelly's composed voice. Following this, testimony was presented. Officer Naomi Brennan delivered her written account concerning the threat Tiffany issued 6 years ago. Her tone remained even but detached. Subsequently, 2 individuals previously arrested testified, both noting that Tiffany's name appeared in their official records, even though they were not present during the incidents. She reportedly authorized their arrests without providing any clarification. A succession of witnesses offered similar accounts, while Tiffany remained still, her gaze fixed forward, exhibiting no visible response. Towards the conclusion of the proceedings, the chairwoman requested Judge Kelly to approach the microphone. He arrived without legal documents or written notes, simply standing with his jacket fastened and then speaking. I will not take this board's time reiterating what everyone witnessed. That information is already part of the public record. He began. What I want to focus on is what follows accountability, because that's where the essential work commences. He paused. A few pens scratched against paper. I have served this county for over a decade. I have observed people commit reckless actions out of fear. I have seen people lash out because they felt insignificant. But what transpired that day in my courtroom was neither fear nor a mistake. It was an instinctive reaction developed over years of unrestricted authority. He shifted subtly, just enough to connect with Tiffany's gaze. I'm not present to destroy anyone's life. I'm here to bring this community to remember what justice should embody, and what it must not resemble evermore. Then he took his seat. There was no applause, no acknowledgments, only silence. Tiffany's legal representative offered some concluding remarks, largely formal, primarily requesting compassion. It was inconsequential. The board observed a short break prior to releasing their recommendation. Officer Tiffany Rourke was scheduled for permanent removal from duty. All benefits were to be revoked, and her conduct would be referred to the state attorney for further review. She remained still, appearing detached, as the room cleared. The way people regarded her had changed, not with fear or even animosity, but with a lack of interest. That absence of concern felt particularly painful. Judge Kelly passed her as he left. He did not pause. He did not glance back. Because some individuals do not require revenge, the truth was sufficient. Long after the cameras stopped flashing, the question lingered. What lesson would the community retain from the quiet that ultimately compelled the system to respond? Weeks elapsed. The headlines diminished. Other controversies gained prominence. Yet, in Franklin County, a change occurred. Genuinely this time. Not merely in hushed conversations. Not in secret meetings. But in the way people viewed the system. In the way they viewed one another. The courtroom where it happened remained active. Cases proceeded as they always did. However, a palpable shift occurred when Judge Antoine Kelly entered the room. Everyone rose with a distinct air of reverence, not solely due to his position, but because of how he conducted himself. He never sought recognition or accolades. He consistently performed his duties. On one afternoon, following a juvenile hearing, a young public defender approached him in the hallway. "Can I ask you something, Judge?" She inquired, looking around. She then asked, "That day, how did you stay calm?" He paused for a moment. I preferred not to give her what she anticipated. Then he smiled gently. He nodded once, and he walked on. That response lingered with her, and it resonated through the courthouse in other ways. Officers began participating in revised bias training that held genuine significance. A community board was granted substantive authority, more than just a nameplate and a folding table. Certain old case files were examined. Not every single one, but a selection, sufficient to signal that the doors were beginning to open. Regarding Tiffany Rourke, she reseated. She divested her home discreetly and relocated to a new area spanning 3 counties. There were no interviews granted, nor any public announcements made. She secured employment in private security for a shipping company. Her name ceased to be prominently featured in news reports, appearing only occasionally as a minor reference in opinion pieces. There was no return to public life, no narrative of recovery. Her decline wasn't sudden, it was gradual. Yet, what she forfeited was the sole thing of consequence to her: authority. And in its place, a silence settled that she couldn't alter. Simultaneously, more individuals stepped forward. Individuals harmed by fellow officers. Significant events, all fueled by what they witnessed in the courtroom. They sought not retribution, but recognition. That was the impact. The incident when Tiffany struck Judge Kelly was pivotal. It represented the culmination of a previously concealed history, a truth that resonated with the public. In a community like Franklin County, where progress typically unfolded gradually and discreetly, such visibility had a profound effect, extending far beyond the police department. The event disrupted the routines of an entire community. During a town hall meeting held 2 months afterward, a woman addressed the group. She appeared older, with her glasses slipping down her nose, and spoke with a steady voice. "I don't want another apology," she stated. "I want policies. I want change that doesn't wait for the next viral video." The room acknowledged her sentiment, understanding precisely what she meant. They understood because they had witnessed the repercussions when someone believes their badge provides immunity from accountability. Reality entered the room, presenting itself with the authority of a judge. This wasn't a fabricated narrative. There were no 11th-hour collapses, no sensational admissions. Instead, it was the gradual decline of an individual from a position of high regard, and the subsequent, equally deliberate effort to construct something more substantial in its place. The confines of that courtroom would forever remember the events that transpired within them. The initial impact might diminish. The media attention may dissipate, but the underlying principle endured. Unfettered power can become destructive. A lack of expression can carry more weight than vocal protest. And genuine justice doesn't require a forceful declaration to be acknowledged. What lessons can we draw from these observations? Perhaps it's that a person's true nature invariably emerges when no one appears to be observing, when a feeling of invulnerability takes hold, or when a facade falls away in a moment that cannot be retrieved. Tiffany established a dominion based on intimidation. Judge Kelly cultivated his standing through composure. Only one of them presently holds a position in the setting, ultimately, that embodies justice. Should this account prompt reflection, evoke emotion, or simply inspire a moment of consideration, please subscribe to the channel. We share narratives that others hesitate to explore, with truth as our guiding principle. 2 men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a card, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her Snap card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly, you consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. "Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases." Roderick inhaled deeply. "Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue?" Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. "This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary. He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary. Weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. "Got enough for the machine?" he inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. "Oh, I was just checking if I'd change," she explained, adding, "I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently." Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. "Let me assist," he offered. She paused. "I didn't request," she began, but he gently interrupted. "You didn't." "I'm offering," she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. "What's your name?" she asked. Roderick extended his hand. "Tanya. Tanya Wells." A tremor passed between them, a connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. "I know," Roderick replied, "but I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical," she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. "I hope he remembers your face," she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. "You got kids?" Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. "No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital." Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. "So you're the safe place for somebody?" Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. "Trying to be," he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. "You don't speak as if you're frightened," she stated. "I wasn't," Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. "I've experienced conflict before," he stated. "It hasn't altered much. Words did today." Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. "I anticipated an attempt." "They will not," Roderick stated calmly. "Not tonight." A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. "I observed what you did," she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. "I regret not saying anything," she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. "You will next time." The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. "Come on, dear." He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot, the little girl now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition. genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. "Safe place for somebody," he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken, instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting. Like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, The modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees, and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and two grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discreet actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her, this small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled, a genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. After a Black woman CEO experienced denial of service at her bank, she maintained composure. Within 5 minutes, the manager responsible for the incident was terminated. The errand was intended to be brief, approximately 10 to 15 minutes, a task easily managed between scheduled meetings. That morning, Nadira Langston, aged 48, the head of a multi-million-dollar tech firm located in Phoenix, Arizona, exited her driver's black Lincoln and entered Sycamore First Bank, carrying her company's banking portfolio carefully. She was unhurried. There was no need for haste. Her schedule had been completely free to allow her to complete the transfer of a substantial business account, which was one of several her company had been relocating for months. The account manager she typically collaborated with had retired, and today she was meeting the new team in person to finalize the documents. A simple, standard procedure. Her navy blue suit was expertly tailored. Her hair was styled in a neat, low bun, and she wore diamond studs in her ears. Understated, yet refined. Her heels made no clicking sound as she moved. They barely rustled. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had held a position of authority for a significant period and no longer felt the need to demonstrate it. Approaching the reception desk, she provided her name, Nadira Langston. She explained she was there to meet with someone from the commercial accounts department. The young woman at the counter glanced up, briefly nodding while entering information into the system. Okay, just a moment. It was then that things began. A woman, appearing to be in her mid-50s, with pale blonde hair and a rigid posture, emerged from a nearby glass office and walked over, offering a smile that seemed strained. "Can I help you with something?" she inquired. Her voice was concise. Nadira turned and offered her hand. "Yes, thank you. I'm Nadira Langston. I understand I'm scheduled to meet with someone from the business team. I'm completing a transfer." The woman didn't return the handshake. She looked at the folder Nadira held. "And you are representing which company?" "I'm the CEO of Bluestone Dynamics." The account was previously managed by Peter Larson before his retirement. The manager raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "And you're here, unaccompanied?" "Yes," Nadira responded calmly. "It's a private matter." A pause followed, one of those pauses that conveys more than a complete sentence, the kind where judgment is disguised as confusion. "Right?" the woman said, adjusting her position. "We generally don't permit walk-ins for high-tier accounts unless it has been arranged beforehand." Nadira stated, still calm. She retrieved the confirmation email. "Here's the appointment confirmation from your internal scheduler. Today, 9:30 a.m. The woman looked at the document, then back at Nadira. "Are you certain this wasn't intended for another employee at your organization?" Nadira blinked, deliberately and slowly. "I operate the company." A brief silence followed. "My name is Cheryl Bainbridge. I'm the branch manager. We're dealing with some concerning events lately. Individuals have been falsely presenting their credentials to gain access to valuable accounts. You appreciate the seriousness of this, I'm sure." Nadira fully grasped the situation. "Cheryl, is it?" she replied, her tone remaining calm and measured. "Offering my license, corporate ID, and the transaction papers I'm here to approve?" Cheryl's smile became strained. "It's simply procedure, Ms. Langston. Please don't view it as directed at you." Nadira had encountered that phrase on countless occasions, in numerous boardrooms, airport lounges, and hotel lobbies. However, before she could add anything, Cheryl motioned to the receptionist. "Could you please contact security?" Just to err on the side of caution. It was necessary to confirm her statements. Nadira's mouth remained still. Her tone remained consistent. "Are you summoning security?" she asked. "On the CEO of one of our most important prospective clients?" Cheryl's shoulders became even more rigid. "I didn't suggest that," I replied. "I simply stated we needed to verify." At that moment, a subtle change occurred within the room. A quiet hum arose from a man seated in the waiting area. A brief look passed between two tellers positioned behind the counter. A palpable shift occurred. It was evident Nadira had followed every procedure correctly, yet she was still being made to feel like an outsider. Nadira, however, was not prepared to accept the situation. Not this time. The bank lobby wasn't crowded, but sufficient people were present to observe the unfolding events. An older man, waiting in line, moved uncomfortably. A woman seated close to the loan office took out her phone, feigning a check of her email, but her gaze remained fixed on Nadira and Cheryl. The security guard was not yet present, but Cheryl remained steadfast, as if anticipating immediate reinforcement. Nadira carefully opened her folder. It contained all necessary documentation to confirm her identity: business cards, certified articles of incorporation, 2 forms of identification, and the bank's own records confirming the account transfer. She arranged them on the reception desk methodically, similar to a card dealer. Composed. Accurate. Here, she stated, that is my Arizona state ID. This document confirms my company's EIN. It includes the board resolution authorizing me as the account signer. In this, she indicated the final sheet is your bank's welcome letter. Cheryl briefly reviewed the papers. Anyone can print documents, she stated, crossing her arms. I've worked in banking for 27 years. I've seen people pretend to be CFOs, consultants, even heirs to estates. We don't make exceptions just because someone claims they're important. Nadira's tone remained steady, but her eyes narrowed. So this isn't about the paperwork? It's about how I appear, correct? Cheryl let out a dismissive sound. I beg your pardon. You heard me. If I presented myself as a 55-year-old man in a Brooks Brothers suit, you'd be extending a handshake and offering coffee. Ma'am, please reduce your voice volume. Nadira responded. My voice is already subdued, her words sharp and clear. I am the CEO. You have reviewed the documents. You know my name. The only thing that seemed to register was that I wasn't what they anticipated. A silence followed. A protracted, uncomfortable silence, and then Cheryl spoke. It wasn't a shout, but it carried. You just don't look like a CEO? The statement lingered, heavy as smoke after a match. Someone inhaled sharply. Another person murmured, Did she really just say that? The receptionist stood motionless behind the desk. She appeared to wish she could simply vanish. Nadira's eyelids lowered deliberately, yet her voice remained steady. I have secured more than $80 million in venture capital. I have spearheaded 3 product launches. I have presented as a keynote speaker at CES and finalized agreements in 6 countries. I don't need to appear any particular way to be completely myself. Cheryl began to respond. However, before she could, Nadira shifted slightly and asked the receptionist, Is there a regional director assigned to this branch? The young woman nodded hesitantly. He is present today, in fact. It's a surprise audit. He's in the back conference room. Nadira's lips formed a slight smile. Excellent. I wish to speak with him. Then, Cheryl intervened once more, visibly agitated. There's no necessity for that. I am capable of managing this. Let's avoid making the situation worse. Nadira faced her directly. You have already worsened this. You summoned security. You rejected every form of identification I presented. You challenged my position, my firm, and my credibility, all without initiating a single phone call to confirm any detail. Therefore, no, you're not capable of handling this. The room fell silent. The receptionist lifted the phone and initiated a call to an internal extension. Mr. Dorsey? She inquired. There is someone present requesting to speak with you. Her name is Nadira Langston from Bluestone Dynamics. A brief hesitation. Yes. All right. I will inform him. She ended the call and turned to Nadira, her eyes displaying surprise. He is on his way out now. Meanwhile, Cheryl remained unaware of the significant misjudgment she had made. The door situated at the rear of the bank swung open, and a tall man, dressed in a charcoal suit, emerged. He moved with a brisk, purposeful stride, alert but not hurried. He held a slim leather tablet and wore an expression suggesting displeasure at being interrupted from meetings. However, his expression softened immediately when he saw Nadira. Nadira Langston, he said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly. Yes, you must be Mr. Dorsey. He continued, Matthew Dorsey, Regional Director. I've heard a lot about you. Peter spoke very highly before he retired. We appreciate the opportunity to manage your accounts. Cheryl's mouth parted slightly, and her face paled. Matthew turned to her, appearing puzzled. Did something go wrong with the meeting? Cheryl struggled to find the right words. Yes, there was. I simply verified the credentials before providing access to the commercial suite. This follows our standard procedure. Nadira remained silent. She didn't need to. The receptionist, still positioned behind the counter, added cautiously. She contacted security, sir. She stated that we were unable to verify the client's identity. Matthew blinked. You contacted security? Regarding Ms. Langston? I was attempting to adhere to established procedures. Cheryl responded promptly. We've experienced individuals recently presenting fabricated business credentials. I prefer not to assume any risks. You understand how crucial our commercial accounts are." He gave her a direct look. "Yes, I am aware. This is why we verify credentials, rather than form assessments of clients based on subjective impressions." Cheryl's shoulders tightened. "Excuse me?" She began. "I've reviewed the compliance logs. You didn't even access the file she presented. You disregarded the scheduled appointment. You dismissed the identification. I was safeguarding the bank," she asserted. "You embarrassed the bank," Matthew retorted. "You've publicly humiliated one of the most significant clients we've on board this year. In view of customers, in view of staff, with no justification." A security guard finally arrived at the front entrance, his radio clipped to his belt, meticulously scanning the room, as if anticipating trouble. Matthew dismissed him with a wave. "Everything's fine here, Eric," Cheryl repeated, her voice now trembling. False alarm. She had entered alone. Her name wasn't on the standard schedule. It was on the revised internal schedule, the one your assistant oversees. The same schedule you approve every Monday morning. "You simply didn't review it," Nadira stated, stepping forward slightly, her voice low but clear. "You hadn't acted without delay because of an absence. You paused because I didn't align with your preconceived notion of who should possess such authority." Matthew remained silent, allowing the quiet to linger. There was nothing further to elaborate on. Cheryl's mouth opened once more, but she spoke no words. "Ms. Langston," Matthew stated, pivoting with a return to decorum, "would you be willing to accompany me? I will personally oversee your transaction from my office." Nadira acknowledged with a single nod. "Certainly." They started to leave, passing the lines of desks and glass-walled offices. Cheryl stayed still by the front desk, her eyes wide, her face unreadable. No one moved towards her. The receptionist looked at her keyboard. The security guard walked away slowly, seeming unsure of what to do. Just as they were about to vanish down the hallway, Matthew halted and turned. Cheryl looked up, clearly surprised. "My office. After this meeting, we'll be discussing your role here in detail." He didn't raise his voice. Wasn't necessary. However, Cheryl already sensed a change in the atmosphere. Matthew's office presented a crisp, though understated, impression. It featured clean lines, 2 chairs positioned across from his desk, and a tall window allowing morning light to spread across the carpet. Nadira waited until he invited her to sit, and even then, she maintained a straight posture and a composed demeanor. He closed the door softly, then turned back to face her. "Ms. Langston, I want to apologize for what just happened. That should not have occurred. Not here. Not anywhere. You were treated unfairly," Nadira stated calmly, placing her folder on the desk. "However, this isn't the first time. It probably won't be the last," Matthew responded, leaning against the edge of his desk. "We have protocol for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening." Cheryl disregarded every step. "She didn't just disregard protocol," Nadira said. "She formed an opinion of me immediately upon seeing my face." Matthew breathed out his nose, crossing his arms. "I acknowledge that." He resumed looking at the documents she had placed before him, reviewing them without speaking. He wasn't hurried. He was carefully considering everything. "Everything is in the correct order," he stated. "I never questioned it. However, I do want to inquire. Did she allow you any opportunity to provide an explanation before summoning security?" "Not really," Nadira responded. "She recognized my name, saw my face, and heard my title, yet still inquired if the appointment belonged to another person." Matthew rubbed his jaw. "That will present a challenge for her. A significant one." Nadira inclined her head. "I didn't intend for anyone to lose their job. I am aware of that. However, sometimes repercussions are deserved." Immediately, his office phone vibrated. He answered, listened briefly, then instructed, "Send her in." A knock followed shortly, and Cheryl entered. The usual assuredness had vanished. Her face was pale, her shoulders slightly hunched. She walked as if unsure how to position her hands or where to look. "Ms. Langston," she began, her voice quiet. "I owe you an apology. I was mistaken. That wasn't my goal." "You don't have to pretend," Nadira stated, interrupting. Her voice wasn't harsh, only resolute. You acted precisely as you did. You didn't believe I was who I claimed to be. And instead of verifying, you chose to embarrass me. Cheryl looked to Matthew, visibly wanting him to intervene. He remained silent. I've spent over 2 decades in this field. She continued, I've witnessed fraud, identity theft, all sorts of deception. And none of that pertains to me, Nadira stated. You didn't err due to caution. You err because you believed you could evade detection, Matthew finally said. Cheryl, following a review of events this morning, encompassing internal audit records and client appointment logs, I have decided to end your employment, effective immediately. Cheryl blinked. And? Are you serious? Yes, I am, Matthew replied. You breached client protocol, showed disrespect to one of our most valuable account holders, and created a public disturbance that jeopardized the bank's reputation. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, and it concludes here. She appeared ready to retaliate, but the atmosphere offered no space for her to exert herself. She faced Nadira. I didn't intend to cause you any personal offense, she said. You didn't offend me, Nadira replied softly. You showed disrespect. There's a distinction. Cheryl lowered her gaze, then pivoted, exited the doorway, and left it slightly open. Matthew remained still for a moment. Subsequently, he settled into his desk chair and raised his head. I trust that achieves a degree of responsibility. This is a beginning, Nadira responded. However, beyond the confines of that office, the narrative was quickly moving away from the bank. Information doesn't spread rapidly within a bank, except when a significant event occurs. And what unfolded that morning at Sycamore was not merely significant, it was irrefutable. As Nadira and Matthew left the office, the ambience in the lobby had fundamentally changed. Patrons remained silent. Tellers murmured behind their workstations. Cheryl's absence was more pronounced than her presence had ever been. The nameplate had already been taken from the front glass office, as if she had never worked there. Matthew walked Nadira out personally. I'll ensure the rest of the paperwork is managed by someone capable, he said. You shouldn't have to experience this level of absurdity. Ever. Nadira nodded. Accepting the folder, he returned to her. The paperwork is the straightforward part, she replied. He gave a quiet, respectful laugh. Indeed, they arrived at the front doors, where 2 customers graciously held them open. A teller rose from behind the counter and offered a small wave, hesitant yet genuine. The sun was ascending higher above Phoenix. The air was dry, and the pavement was warm. Nadira hesitated close to the curb, her driver advancing, the car door already ajar. She glanced back at Matthew. A statement you made in your office resonated with me, that occasionally consequences are deserved. He affirmed this with a nod. Yes, I agree, she stated, but repercussions lacking comprehension do little to affect change. Matthew lifted his eyebrows, showing interest. I don't want Cheryl to experience hardship, Nadira proceeded. I need people to understand this wasn't about me. This occurs for Black professionals, particularly women, on a daily basis. It happens at airports, restaurants, stores, and meetings. And frequently, no one faces termination. They're simply disregarded. Again and again, he remained silent. He allowed her to continue. Perhaps for the first time, someone like him genuinely listened. If the bank is to address this with seriousness, she stated, refrain from simply publishing a statement online. Avoid issuing a standard apology. Initiate a dialogue. Instruct your managers regarding the oversights made. Prevent this from recurring for the next woman who enters that establishment. Matthew inhaled deeply, his posture now slightly more burdened. You are correct. I am unable to reverse the events that transpired. However, I can ensure they contribute to a positive outcome. That's the true measure, isn't it? Nadira responded. Not what one accomplishes with an audience, but what one alters when unobserved. She entered the vehicle, and the door closed behind her. The interior was quiet, but the silence felt clean. Her driver glanced back through the mirror. Everything satisfactory, Ms. Langston? She looked at her hands, then out the window at the glass facade of the bank. Cheryl had resolved to ignore her. The crucial decision, the one that would have significant impact, had already been made by someone else. Yes, it has, she said softly. Nadira didn't know that within 24 hours the entire country will be discussing what transpired inside that branch. It began with a tweet, just a few lines from someone who had been sitting near the loan officer's desk that morning. Just witnessed a black woman CEO get denied service at her own bank. She remained composed, publicly addressed the bias, and the manager was terminated immediately. I don't know her name, but I won't forget her demeanor. By lunchtime, the tweet had surpassed 40,000 likes. By evening, it appeared on Instagram, then Facebook, and subsequently on local news. A local blogger identified Nadira's name by comparing information with a press release Bluestone Dynamics released earlier that month. A Phoenix reporter verified the information with the bank. By nightfall, Nadira Langston was trending across the nation. She made no public statements. Wasn't necessary. Others shared their experiences. LinkedIn was filled with accolades. Corporate professionals, frequently black women, recounted similar situations, being questioned at the valet of their own office buildings, asked to show ID 3 times before boarding first-class flights, being addressed as sweetie, even while leading negotiations worth millions. People described Nadira as graceful, resilient, and composed. However, those who understood the situation better explained that it was more than grace. It was a matter of survival. Simultaneously, Sycamore First corporate headquarters mobilized. Within 24 hours, they issued a statement recognizing the incident, confirming Cheryl Bainbridge's departure from employment, and affirming the company's dedication to equity and continued training. This response proved insufficient for the public. Numerous comments appeared, questioning how many other Cheryls remain working in your branches. And do your executives grasp that implicit bias training cannot address issues permitted by your hiring processes? Black women should not be expected to remain composed when facing disrespect. Nadira made no public statements regarding the situation until 3 days later when she consented to an interview on a podcast hosted by a longtime friend and business strategist, Leona Bates. They faced each other in a silent studio in Tempe, with microphones activated and without any prepared notes. Leona began softly, asking, "You've remained silent while the internet has erupted. What prompted this response now?" Nadira answered, "Because the matter is no longer about me." Leona focused on what this situation highlighted. Specifically, that despite possessing the correct titles, documents, and credentials, people still perceive you as an outsider. Speaking out is then labeled as causing a disturbance, while remaining quiet is interpreted as agreement. It's a draining predicament, regardless of the choice. They discussed the matter for almost an hour, extending beyond the bank to address the significant emotional burden of maneuvering within established hierarchies while burdened by long-standing prejudices. Nadira remained composed. She didn't express sadness or frustration. Instead, she simply stated the facts, clearly, steadily, and without question. Following the broadcast, a fresh surge of interest emerged. This interest was authentic, thoughtful, and not superficial. Fellow CEOs contacted her. Business publications featured the narrative. A headline declared, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar." Nevertheless, Nadira maintained a grounded perspective. She did not desire recognition. She sought transformation. And she understood that meaningful change rarely appears in news headlines. The bias appeared in hiring practices, policy decisions, and even in determining who was initially believed. Even after the initial news coverage faded and the events became part of collective memory, those who witnessed her that morning at the bank still remembered what they saw. A few weeks later, Nadira addressed a room full of college students at Arizona State University. She had not intended to give any public speeches that season, as her schedule was already very full. When a business ethics professor contacted her and requested a conversation with her class, she readily agreed. The event was understated. There were no stage lights or press coverage, just 40 students, some taking notes in notebooks, others using laptops, eager to hear from the woman whose experience transformed a regular bank visit into a nationwide conversation. She presented no slides. There was no podium. She simply walked to the room's front, paused, and began speaking. "I won't be telling a storybook narrative," she stated. "I won't be suggesting that if you labor diligently, no one will challenge you, because that isn't invariably accurate." The room fell silent, all attentive. You can possess the title, the suit, the contracts, the track record, and still be informed that you don't belong, not due to any failings on your part, but because someone else cannot envision your triumph without a face resembling their own. She surveyed the room. Her voice remained gentle, but each word resonated. And in those moments, a choice presents itself. Do you contract to ease their discomfort, or do you maintain your full presence, even if it creates tension in the space? A young man seated in the front row raised his hand. He asked, "How did you manage to remain composed during that experience? Weren't you feeling anger?" Nadira responded with a slow nod. "Naturally, I was. But anger is only valuable if you understand how to channel it. That day, I employed it to remain grounded. I employed that tactic to ensure she couldn't dismiss me without looking me in the eye while doing it." Another hand then rose, this time from a young woman. "What advice would you offer someone just beginning, who hasn't developed a resume like yours?" Nadira hesitated. "Recognize your value before anyone else attempts to define it for you. And if they try to diminish you, speak regardless, even if your voice trembles." There is a certain quality to her delivery, as if she were addressing herself as much as the listener. Following the presentation, students formed a line to express their gratitude. Some simply desired to shake her hand. Others sought guidance. One young woman, speaking softly, shared, "I'm studying engineering. I'm considering dropping out. I didn't believe there was a place for someone with my background." Nadira responded, making direct eye contact, "There is. And if there isn't, create it." That evening, back in her office, Nadira found herself alone at her desk, enjoying a cup of tea. Her inbox remained full. Her phone continued to buzz. The excitement hadn't fully subsided. She understood that the public's attention would fade. However, certain individuals would retain the memory. The students, the customers present in that bank lobby, the employees who witnessed a manager lose her position due to someone's unwillingness to yield. And perhaps, in the future, when a woman like her entered a place where she wasn't anticipated, she might be greeted instead of questioned. She might be respected, all because of one moment, one voice, one refusal to remain silent. If this story resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Change doesn't always begin with prominent demonstrations or widespread media attention. Occasionally, it originates with a composed, persistent voice that states, "This isn't right."